How's it going, everybody? This is Conscious Bodybuilding Podcast. The episode number is 27, I think, or 28. I don't know. We're on one of those numbers. So today we got Shimmy and Trevor back on, and today we are going to be talking about training age and how that relates to exercise selection, how that relates to the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So to first get into the topic, I wanted to ask you guys how you two go about determining training age. Say someone comes to you and they a lot of the time, like, and for example, I might ask somebody what they think their training age is or how long they've been training for. But that isn't actually their training age, right? What are some of the factors that you use to determine someone's training age and how to program appropriately for them?
Shimmy, you want to go?
Yeah, I can go first. So, like you, Dylan, I will usually always ask someone how many years they've been training. But to be very honest with you, whatever answer they give, like it will be very apparent in the way that they communicate and in the way that they send me their training footage. So once I can see their technique, I'll kind of have an idea. That's one. Obviously, also from like looking at them, if they're decently strong, like I haven't come across people who are super duper strong that have been training for a year or two. I know they're out there. I haven't come across them. So that really hasn't been a thing for me. But in reality, I end up wiping the slate clean with majority of people that I end up helping or working with. So whatever their training age is, at least initially, is somewhat irrelevant. And I think that this happens with a lot of people that are taking on clients because at the end of the day, like you're starting their volume from scratch, you're reworking their technique on a lot of movements. So maybe I could determine training age with how much pushback they give. If someone's been training for a long time, typically you experience more pushback than somebody who's been training for less time. It's a weird, like, sideways way of thinking about it, but that's what I've experienced.
Pushback in the sense that they like have a sense of like, I know what I'm doing, or
Yeah, I mean, you guys have both had the conversation before where it's like, hey man, why don't you change your technique on the squat? It's like, why? But I like doing it this way and I can squat 4 plates. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But
yeah,
you asked me, right? Or you would be doing it yourself.
yeah, fair enough. Trevor, you were going to add to that?
Yeah, so agree with Shimmy on the fact that like at some point I'm not sure how much it matters when you first start working with somebody, but it's definitely a good metric to have because it helps give you some insight into where you need to take things. So obviously, again, we all do ask how long someone's been training, and you can review their technique, and a lot of times that does give you a lot of insight into it. But my kind of quick and dirty assessment is your training age is based largely on the amount of effort it takes to get progress. As a beginner, you don't need a lot of effort to get progress. You can kind of do anything. Your diet doesn't need to be 100% on point. Your sleep doesn't need to be 100% on point. Your training doesn't need to be 100% on point. As you become more intermediate, those things pick up a little bit. You need to be more, like 80% with diet, 80% with sleep, with training, things like that. And at an advanced training age, you're just not going to see any progress unless you're ticking every one of those boxes. So that's kind of my quick and dirty assessment to figure out someone's training age is how precise they are with everything and how precise they need to be to continue to make progress.
Fair enough.
I have a few things to push back with you there on what you just said. Not that anything that you said was wrong. Like I agree with you, of course. But for example, on the last thing that you said, how meticulous they are with tracking, there are people that are advanced that don't track. That is totally a thing. There's of course a select group of us we're narcs, but there's a lot of other people who have been training for a long time and they don't track, right?
That's true.
Right.
But if you take somebody who doesn't track diet, they likely eat the same thing every day. So that kind of turns into a wash. And if you take someone who never tracks their training and just goes by feel, then simply by adding tracking to their training, they're going to make much more progress in a very quick period of time. So
sure.
I would determine that as an intermediate.
You would, even if they've been training for 10 years.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Because maybe they've been fucking around for 5 years and haven't actually progressed load and free.
Mm-hmm.
because they've
Okay.
just every single week they've done something different. And so it's like, well, what do you bench? Oh, well, every time I've benched in the last 3 years, I've worked up to 275, and that's the most I've done. I would call
that's fair. Yeah, that's fair, I guess.
elite level intermediate.
And then in the other thing that you mentioned about how much effort it takes them to make progress, I would agree with that. But that also takes time for you to learn on your part, unless you're saying when you're having a conversation with them and you're like, oh, you've been lifting for 10 years, but you squat 225. Maybe it's, you know what I mean? Maybe it's that. And obviously you're saying that their technique under that context is already decent. I'm not gonna say it's amazing, but it's decent.
Yeah, I at least already know what their technique is.
Yeah. I think I'm dragging a little bit on this topic just because I largely don't care. You know what I mean? Like
largely,
at the end of the day, like
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of these things. And granted, I will not go on this rant unless you want me to, but Dylan, but I think that so many coaches have so many stupid, irrelevant questions in their questionnaire and their onboarding process. And I've spoken to people on Instagram where they've DM'd me and we've kind of like briefly chatted about this, that are just so useless. And when it comes to training age, it's like I don't even know how useful it is. At the end of the day, like, we want to get better, and there's tools that we can give you to get better, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah. Again, I think it's just, it gives us insight into perhaps how things are going to go in the next 3 months.
Wait, so I have their zodiac sign on their questionnaire. Do you think I should take that off?
Clearly, that's a necessity.
Yeah, I program based on their biorhythm related to the moon cycle and their zodiac sign.
Dude, it's very important, okay? Because once you know somebody's zodiac sign, you know exactly how they're going to communicate. You know exactly how they are, and it's important.
Make adjustments based on the horoscope.
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay, good.
When Mercury is in retrograde.
No, so what I was going to say is that I think that it's also it's a multifactorial assessment. And does it matter what you label a client as? No, I think in the back of my head, I'm kind of like, okay, I think this person's around intermediate. It's not like I'm going to make adjustments based on my assessment of them of being an intermediate. Like, I'm only going to stick to that. Like, there's different things that need to be adjusted. And it's definitely like a spectrum based on a lot of inputs, right? But I do agree with Trevor. Obviously, their age in the gym, and I think you mentioned this too, Shimmy, their age in the gym doesn't necessarily equate to their actual training age. So a lot of people, I think, or I don't know, diagnose is the right term, but they basically say, I'm an advanced trainee because I'm training for 10 years, but then they have not great technique. They haven't been tracking their food, yada, yada, yada. They may end up being a beginner or intermediate in terms of how they need to be programmed for and their progress as well. I guess that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, but really, like, in practice, have you guys actually seen that? Like, if someone is coming to you for online coaching, they're generally not, the normal bear, if you will.
Yeah,
right? They already think about stuff somewhat. So, if they're coming to you, like, maybe their tracking is not, what it needs to be, but they have been training hard for 6 or 7 years, and they're natural. Let's just say that. Once you get their stuff in line, is it like fountain of youth all over again, or is it just, oh, now you're making just I don't know, 10% more progress than you would have otherwise?
No, I've actually seen that. I've had clients come to me that have trained for 5-6 years, and I mean, put on, in 6 months they put on 10 pounds of muscle. Their technique improves. Their lifts go up 20% with better technique, and it's because while they were training hard, they weren't actually training hard. They were training what they thought was hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
More I think it depends on the individual too, because I think you could have someone who comes to you, hasn't been doing any of that. You change it. Maybe there's an initial novelty effect, and then it tapers off.
Yeah, totally. There's no like one size fits all. Like, there's individualization. That's a whole part of this, is we have to individualize for the individual person we're working with. And so in the end, that's why what someone's, what we would classify them in doesn't matter as much, because we start with a baseline and adjust from there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the overarching reason why I asked this question is because we wanted to talk a little bit about how this relates to exercise selection and biasing the stimulus side. I believe that's correct. Biasing the stimulus side while picking exercises that are very stimulative, but also very, very low in fatigue. Trevor, you've seen this a lot. Maybe you can explain this phenomenon that you see.
So be backwards, and you'll see this a lot on
Switch
social
up.
media, or people are so hyper focused on fatigue
Okay, sorry.
that they don't think about the stimulus that they're getting. And so you'll see this as ways like somebody's like, oh, well, I don't want to do a barbell row or a dumbbell row because that's really fatiguing. So instead, I'm going to do a cable row. Or there's any number of other things you see that as. You'll see it as, I don't want to do a barbell press. I want to do a machine press or a cable press or whatever. Or the big one, and I'm sure we're going to get YouTube comment on this, is they don't want to do pull-ups, but they want to do some special angle lat pull down or lat row or something like that. And they're so focused on like being like a low fatiguing exercise that they're also picking relatively low stimulus exercises. And so the total amount of work they have to do to just achieve the same stimulus is a lot more. And half the time it just cancels each other out.
Dude, I have an interesting point of view on this actually that I didn't voice before. Tell me what you think of this. Do you think that a lot of people run from these exercises as a means of masking the fact that they're bad at them?
Yes.
And that they're weak?
Yes.
So they mask the fact that they don't do these compound movements by covering themselves in variation and new angles and new positions and stuff like that, and then justifying their poor performance on pull-ups or bench press or whatever the case as either saying, oh, I did all of those other movements beforehand, so I'm tired, or those don't really work for me, so therefore I go to these other things. When in reality, maybe they just need to face the music that they're just not going to be that big, not going to be that strong, or just accept the fact that these things are too hard and they just don't want to do them, and owning that.
I think that's a big part of it. Personally, I think that's a very large part of it is they don't want to take the time to learn how to do it. They don't want to take the time to get strong. They want to take the thing that's easy to do, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just like, if you're saying like, oh, I want to get big.
Well, there is something wrong with it when you're lying.
Yeah,
there is
exactly.
something wrong with
that's
it.
What I'm getting
there is something wrong with it when you're trying to justify variation as a means of you being weak.
That's what I'm getting at. It's a problem if you're using it, if you're saying one thing and doing something else. Your goals and your actions aren't aligning. That's when it's a problem. If you're like, I just want to go to the gym to have fun, like, do whatever you want to do. Nobody cares.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also routed from like typical bodybuilder programming, which is 6 rows and 3 vertical pulling exercises in a back workout, right? So it comes from that. When in reality, you'd be better off with 1 barbell row, 1 pull down in that whole session, and train back again 3 days later. Yeah. Okay.
So when someone's making this assessment, why like, how do I word this? So we generally have the idea that advanced trainees may need to do more of this, right?
Yes.
How would someone go about assessing whether or not the exercises are appropriate for them? Like, how would you determine, you might need more, for example, to do more deadlifts as opposed to like, I don't know, a back extension or something like that isolated?
Sure. So, I mean, of course, number one, needs analysis is huge, right? So, if right, that you need to bring up your back or your spine, then obviously you move accordingly, deadlift, back extension, or whatever. I think it is commiserate with if it gives you any pain. So if you have no joint pain or no niggles or issues like that, then that could be useful in saying that this might be an exercise for you. Obviously, if it causes disruption and soreness and growth, then this might be an exercise for you. And I think also you have to give it time. and a fair bit of time doing it when it doesn't feel that great, because these things don't always feel that great, right? Like everybody says, we can keep using deadlifts. Like, oh, deadlifts are fun, deadlifts are awesome. Well,
Deadlifts
sometimes they're
suck.
not. No, okay, fine. I like them, so that's just me. Okay.
No, I mean they're great and all, but they hurt.
Sure.
They don't feel
but,
good.
Sure, but the point is that, okay, so let's say on the supposition that like someone likes them, great, but like they don't always feel good. Sometimes they feel horrible. A lot of times they feel really horrible. But just because they feel horrible and make you feel horrible, that means they could still be good.
Yeah,
you know?
it can still be a great exercise. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me it would be if the exercise in question is giving me problems in areas that I'm not trying to target, i.e., I don't know, big bicep pump on a barbell row, shoulder strain on a bench press, then that's data. And another one that you may not have considered, and it's very real, time in the session.
Oh my God,
If
yes.
When you're not that strong and you're not that big, 4 or 5 sets of deficit barbell rowing realistically might take 30 minutes. But when you are, to even do 2 to 3 sets, this might take 45 minutes to do, right? With warm-ups, potentiation, and this, all of that. Do you want to spend that time? Are you training twice a day? Are you a barbell rowing champion, or are you here to train your whole body? We just keep using barbell rows as an example, but insert whatever you want: deadlift, stiff-legged deadlift, hack squat, insert whatever you want. And I think the individual in question has to make that trade-off.
Yeah. So some things I use, and I'll use myself as an example here. I say that deadlift, I hate deadlifts, they suck. I actually love deadlifts, they're fun, but they just hurt really bad.
Sure.
But
I
I
just
just
want to throw in.
Go ahead.
Throw in your technique on deadlifts. Like every time I see it, I'm like, holy shit! Like I aspire to that. I want to see like.
Well, and I do stiff-legged deadlifts now, and they still rock me, but I can manage. And what the big thing that I can manage is.
By the way, Trevor, he's only saying that because I stopped posting stiff-legged deadlift videos, so he hasn't really seen mine in a while. So that's why he's complimenting yours.
You have the weirdest technique. You're like a duck. Your heels.
Yeah, I know my feet. I don't know why my feet are narrow, and
every time I see it, I'm like, why do his feet touch?
I know. I don't even do them anymore. Now I only do them off a deficit, like standing on something.
Yeah, well, I mean, same here. But anyway, when I did actual conventional deadlifts, when I got to the point I had to stop doing conventional deadlifts, I was doing like 475 for sets of 10. Like slow eccentrics, light touch, all that stuff. I love doing them and they were great. But the problem is 3 sets took me damn near an hour. B, I couldn't do anything else after. I couldn't squat. Maybe I could get on a leg extension and maybe do like 2 sets. Maybe. If I had any mental capacity left to do that with. And then the last one is that lingered for days after. That level of fatigue, that the mental fatigue, where I felt like I had no neural drive, just picking up a weight that would normally be fine, felt 20 pounds heavier, would last 2 to 3 days after. So it wasn't just affecting the one session, but it was affecting half a week of training. That's when deadlifts are too fatiguing to do, unless I'm trying to specialize in the deadlift. If I'm trying to train for hypertrophy, that wasn't the goal anymore. That wasn't the best tool for the job anymore, because it limited training, not just a couple of things, but literally half of my body.
So paying attention to how much an exercise, like how much fatigue an exercise causes, would be a way in which we determine potentially should we include that exercise or not.
Yes. Say how much impact the exercise has over the rest of the workout, the rest of the week.
That's the big thing. Huge. You have to look at, if you're like, oh, I'm not doing barbell rows because they're too fatiguing, but you can do barbell rows and then you can do pull downs and then you can do biceps, and then the next day you can come in and you can train chest or you can train quads. Barbell rows aren't too fatiguing. You just don't want to do them. And that's what it is. I mean, If there's another exercise you want to do better, you want to do because you enjoy it more, okay. But if you are simply avoiding them because I don't know, they're hard, and that's not to say that everyone's going to get the best stimulus from a barbell row, but I don't know. I've never actually talked to anybody who has gotten a equal whole back stimulus they get on a barbell row from a cable row, at least on a set to set basis.
Mm-hmm.
And on the counter
And also,
that,
and this. Oh, sorry, Dylan.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and also, I don't think that this can be understated. Although this might be a separate topic. Is if you find that an exercise it used to be great and now it's not great anymore. I mean, pre-exhausting or putting it as a second or third movement is always a great option.
Yeah.
But never jumping to that without trying it first. Right.
Yeah.
So never just haphazardly doing a pullover before a pull-up or doing a leg extension or leg press before a Smith machine squat or something, right? It's like riding that out for as long as you can and then getting into a pre-exhaust or something like that. So there's no need to immediately just throw out a movement. Number one, in general, because you might be able to find like there's data when a movement works for like majority of people. That's enough of a sample size where if it's not working for you, you need to really think why isn't it working and try to make it work, right? You don't need to be married to any exercises, but like guys, let's just keep it real, right? When it comes to bodybuilding stuff, dude, there's like 20 exercises that are like the ones. Yeah, you can schmig and like wiggle around and figure anything out, but chances are that's probably like what it is, 25 exercises. So it's not going to work for you at face value. Like dig deeper. I know this is a side point, but I wanted to just add that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. The counter to that, if we're understimulating, we're not getting any decrements in performance. We may not be even getting sore after the session. Would there be other things we consider? Like, are we doing maybe doing a ton of volume to try to get even some sort of stimulus? Like, what does it look like when we're understimulating and maybe picking too many of these very, very low fatiguing exercises?
Yeah. So, we'll continue to use back as an example. Someone maybe does a pull down and then they do some kind of a high angle pull down, high row, and then they do a lat row, and then they do a upper back row, and then they'll throw in like so they'll do the whole like elbows here row, and then elbows tight in row, so they can hit all the areas of the back, and they have their pull down here to hit the back, and the pull down here, and like at an angle here, and then they'll do maybe some like back extensions because they need some erector work because they haven't done any erector work, and so now they're doing like 8 exercises because they are trying to hit like every angle of the back. And it kind of like Shimmy said, it's a lot like the old bodybuilding magazines. You have to hit every angle of the chest. You do incline, decline, flat, fly, and press every single workout.
Do those workouts.
Yeah, same.
We all did.
Yeah. We've been around long enough. We remember when bodybuilding magazines were a thing before Instagram and the internet took over.
Stack right by my foot right now.
But that's what you'll find, and you'll see it with every single muscle group. It's like they're doing 4 different variations of a tricep exercise, or they have 6 variations for a chest exercise because they're trying to hit all these different short position, long position, and everything. I'm like, man, I get it, but maybe you could just do like a barbell or a dumbbell press, or maybe you could just do a skull crusher.
Jimmy, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, whenever I see people doing that, I just realize that they don't know how to lift weights.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah,
it's really that simple. when you have to start seeking out multiple exercises, like more than 2 or 3 for a body part in a session, either you don't know how to produce effort, or you don't know how to lift weights, or some combination of the two. And usually it's a matrimony of that, because if you knew how to produce effort, you wouldn't have to seek out more exercises.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of multi.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes back to like this thing where it's like that effort is so fatiguing. They want to find things that are easy to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Because they don't
doing,
they don't want to feel that fatigue. But that fatigue is where the stimulus is. Stimulus causes fatigue.
Right.
Well, it's also really boring. When you really learn how to stimulate stuff, you know, when you're really thinking about every single rep, and maybe you're doing pauses and stuff, and you're going very close to failure, it's very boring, and it's very hard, and it's very soul sucking, and it takes a long time, and that's not exciting, unfortunately. But going from one exercise to the other, and when Mark and Jack and Jennifer talk to you in the gym and say, "Oh, what's your workout?" and you say, "I'm going to this neutral grip push down, get nasty pump. Then I'm going to this cable fly, gonna really work the pecs out. Then I'm gonna do some push-ups, you know, stretch it, burn it out." This sounds nice, but when you say, "I'm just going to do some cambered bar benching, then I'm going to do cable crossovers, then I'm going to just die."
Yeah.
People say, "What do you mean? What about the rest of the workout?" And then you go, yo. That is the workout.
That is the workout. Yeah.
I've gotten those questions before, like when someone sees my workout, it's like, why is it only 2 or 3 exercises?
Yeah.
I'm like, trust me, if you do those correct, do those exercises right, it's all you need.
Yeah. I mean, one of my leg workouts this mesocycle has been seated leg curls, hack squats, lunges. I can barely walk afterwards.
Yeah.
And I sit in my car for 30 minutes and contemplate my life before I feel safe enough to drive.
I'll tell you, that's not such a hard sell when it comes to leg movements, because I know we've talked about this previously. When people watch myself, you, Dylan, and the small band of us train legs, it's so different to what anybody else does that it makes sense that we're dying. But that's a harder sell in upper body movements, to just say, "Oh, I'm only doing incline dumbbell curls and a standing easy bar curl, and that's all I'm doing for biceps." And people say, "What do you mean?" And I, to them, I say, because with biceps, you're not dying, right? You're not putting the bar down and saying, "Oh," and like you laying on the floor or anything like that. You have a big pump, and maybe you're gonna grimace and grab your arm. That's as far as it goes, and then in 5 minutes you'll be fine. Maybe. Sure, but you know what I mean? It goes away. So that's a harder sell to say, "Yeah, I have a pump, and when I fall out of the rep range, then it's good night for me, and then I train them 3 days later, and that's how it goes." You know, that's a much harder sell than when someone sees you do a full range of motion pause squat that takes 4 seconds in each rep total, and they say, "Oh, yeah, that looks hard. That makes sense why you're doing that," and leg press and then leaving.
Yeah, I think also a lot of the time it's really difficult when selling someone on this, but also like getting them to try it. You know, like you probably both have had those clients where they're like, you know, they come to you, they train completely different, and then you just tweak a couple things and they're like, "Oh my God, I've never felt like this from a couple sets of curls and this low of volume." And that's always really cool, but it's, you know, they have to have tried it to really know. You know, they've been doing something else for years.
Rich Piana 8-hour arm workout, baby.
Almost did that. One thing I guess I see on the other side, the other extreme, is that people chase these movements that are very fatiguing. Obviously, also proportionately, they may be more stimulative, but they build a large majority of their workouts around these lifts because maybe there's probably a number of reasons, but maybe they think that these lifts are some sort of magic they put on mass, you know, or they're just you have to do these lifts if you want to be a hardcore bodybuilder. Have either of you seen that? I know I see it a lot. And what are some of the issues we can run into there?
Yeah, I think it really simply can be boiled down to weight chasing and parroting. I think it's simply that. Usually the exercises that you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, but rack pulls, partial range of motion leg press, the hammer strength incline plate loaded machine that goes 5 plates or 6 plates aside, the partial range of motion barbell row, right? These are the kind of movements you have in mind, or no? Shrugs.
Yeah, absolutely. Rack pulls are a great example of that.
Yeah. I think it's some combination of one is not more important than the other, but some combination of parroting because their biggest bodybuilder who they look up to did it. And because they have a mismanagement of their goals where they want to be bodybuilders, but they want to be strong like a power lifter, but they don't want to do a squat, bench, and deadlift to the level that a power lifter does, or maybe not even at all. So they find ways to express themselves through a barbell or through a dumbbell to get their rocks off. And this is seemingly the way that they do it. And it's always so comical because they'll go do a rack pull with 7 plates aside, and then they'll say, oh yeah, but now I gotta go get a stretch. And you'll see a big bodybuilder do a pullover with half the stack. And you'll say, what happened? What happened? You were doing all that weight over there, and now you're trying to finesse. I don't really understand what's going on.
I do agree with Shimmy that a lot of that does come down to just weight chasing, things like that. I think some of it is just the mentality of, the more hardcore bodybuilders. If I don't feel beat down, burned into the ground, I didn't do enough. And that mentality, I mean, wrestlers have that mentality. If you guys are ever around wrestlers, is if they are not just beat down bloody into the floor, they didn't work hard enough. But they have the opposite problem where they're so worried about having the most fatiguing exercises, they're actually foregoing stimulus.
Yeah.
So it's this like mismatch where beginners who should be like choosing probably, maybe more fatiguing exercise, they shouldn't be worried so much about their fatigue level because, if you're a beginner, how fatigued can you get? Where the advanced guys, they need to be worried more about like the stimulus level because, if you're strong enough, yes, even if you're doing, partial range of motion, exercises, like you can bury yourself and not be able to actually get any stimulative or enough stimulative work done. So they need to be trying to figure out how to drive the most stimulus they can without running into their fatigue wall.
Yeah, and I think that really it just goes into these guys need to learn how to lift weights.
Yeah,
because as you said,
clean up their technique.
Yeah, exactly. Because you say if people are looking to bury themselves, look, we all bury ourselves on a daily basis, and I'm not chasing load like that. Granted, I'm chasing load within the confines of perfect technique and effort, and it's all tracked and sure, but if one needs to load so much weight on a bar to bury themselves, it is a clear definition that they do not know how to lift weights.
Right. Yeah. One thing
It's
I
very
want to
clear.
one thing I want to throw out there that I think maybe this relates to it, maybe it doesn't, but a lot of that JP crowd that we've mentioned before who do actually like track lifts, I think they sometimes get caught up in this. And one thing I see that's really interesting is they do track their lifts, but they do this kind of like skirt around where they'll be picking super fatiguing exercises and then they stop progressing on a lift and then they change exercises.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you didn't progress, like you stopped progressing, like but you're masking that by picking a different exercise, right? You're so fatigued that you can no longer progress on this exercise, and you're maybe even not losing progression across your training altogether, but you just start rotating movements in order to mask the fact that that you're no longer creating overload, really.
Yeah.
Or able to.
That's
just something I see.
That's literally like OG West Side Conjugate training.
Yeah.
Where it's like, did you get stronger? You literally have done a different exercise every single week, every single session, just so you can say I hit a PR.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think masking performance with variation is a very real thing.
Yeah.
So real progress is, obviously picking a number of lifts and trying to progress them over time, and only rotating those out when it's appropriate. Like Shimmy mentioned earlier, it's causing pain, and either side
causing
can
pain. Yeah, and that's a big thing. I think
suffer from this.
I think one thing that like, just to throw it out there, fatigue isn't just like in this context, we're talking a lot about fatigue as in like neural fatigue, losing ability to express force production, things like that. But we can also classify joint disruption as fatigue.
Mhm.
If my joints are hurting from doing an exercise and I can't adjust my technique, then I'm not going to keep doing that exercise. I don't care how stimulative or fatiguing it is, because eventually that's going to keep me from training multiple other things. That fatigue that is causing my joints and my connective tissue is going to interfere with other things.
Trevor, all I got to say to that is you're not using enough icy hot or wrapping tight enough.
Yeah. Well,
Simple,
somebody get me a sponsorship for like elbow sleeves.
Yeah.
Who does
Get
elbow
the
sleeves?
tightest,
Who wants to sponsor me for that?
Get the tightest elbow sleeves you can. Just
Yeah.
pour icy hot in it on the joint so that everybody in the gym can smell you, and then you should be fine. You don't have to worry about the joint.
So I want to address this guy Gal's question.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I got, because it's very appropriate with what we're saying.
Yeah.
He asked me, how do you actually evaluate your fatigue from each exercise? Any other way than subjective feeling and DOMs? For me and anybody that I've ever helped or worked with, the most objective thing, once I've either taught or assessed that they know how to produce effort under the guise of fantastic technique, is just dropping out of the rep range.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I assess my fatigue. So if I'm seeing 10 to 15 rep range and I'm seeing 15, 15, 15, you're you could keep going. You're good. But if I see you go 15 and then you go 9 in the 10 to 15 rep range, then you're done. you're clearly out of the rep range. And I think that fatigue doesn't always also have to be this large scale thing where you're tired. You can have just very specific fatigue in the target muscle itself, which is actually ideal.
That's the goal. That is the goal.
Exactly. If I know that my chest can no longer provide the appropriate performance in the rep range that is required, great. I know my chest can't, but I feel good, and I move on to the next thing. That's a great thing,
Yeah.
So this is something that I stick to a lot. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. What do I mean? Sometimes you do give up a little bit earlier than you're supposed to, and sometimes you try a little bit harder than you should, but it all washes out in the end. So, Gal, that's the biggest answer that I can give to you. I evaluate fatigue by rep drop off or rep decrement. Is the word decrements?
Yeah,
the formal
state of being decremented.
I think the formal term is fatigue index. I can't remember. I think Menno Henselman's uses that a lot in his in his training.
If you're experiencing significant performance decrements, then
good old British Shimmy.
I don't even know what that was.
I don't either. Don't do it again. It was terrible.
I'm definitely doing it again. I don't know when.
Go ahead,
to answer the question of like, how do we determine fatigue? So a couple points is, one, like I already mentioned, any kind of joint fatigue, like actual like pain in the joints, like that should always be addressed. Some things should not necessarily hurt. Maybe when you're warming up, like you get old, you've injured yourself a dozen times. Sometimes you got to warm up just to not hurt. So ignore the warm-ups. But during a working set, something realistically shouldn't be hurting your joints. If it is, then maybe that's not worth it, because it's fatiguing your connective tissues in a way that will eventually have a widespread impact on the rest of your training. And that's the goal that we want to avoid when we're talking about stimulus fatigue ratio. The fatigue is that we're trying to maximize stimulus and fatigue to the target muscle while minimizing fatigue to everything else. So, like Shimmy said, having local muscular fatigue is great. That's quite literally the goal. Fatigue is a sign of stimulus. But I don't want fatigue from one exercise to be affecting another exercise that is completely separate.
That makes sense. Performance drop off being a measure. Now, this one is interesting when I am programming for clients because I always have to check effort before, because sometimes the reps don't drop off due to not insufficient effort as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I guess that I just wanted to throw that out there as like, first and foremost, check your effort, and then then if you're actually stimulating appropriately, then you will see a drop off.
Yeah.
Trevor, you had some more questions submitted by. Actually, is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on that topic?
No, it's really simple, man.
Yeah. I think that pretty much covered it. Is like
Go ahead.
Remember that fatigue isn't something that we should run from.
Yeah.
And understand your place in training, where if you're a beginner, you probably have a lot more room for fatigue because you can't create a whole bunch. If you're advanced, you probably need to pay a little bit more attention to your fatigue.
Yeah. Be honest with yourself.
Yeah, be honest with yourself.
That's difficult to teach sometimes, but try your best if you really are.
Look, we're all meathead bodybuilders in the end.
Yeah.
We all have an ego. It's part of it. So eventually, like I think we all need to, check ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. I have to all the time. I pick a load. I'll start trying to progress something, and sometimes I watch my technique at the end of a mesocycle, and it's starting to slip because I was.
What the hell was that?
Yeah, exactly. And you got to reset.
Yeah. I did get a couple of questions. Did you get any other questions, Shimmy, or did you get anything, Dylan?
No,
I think
they all got sent. They got sent to my personal Instagram. So I end up doing Q&As every weekend. So I guess whatever questions I had, I already answered them.
Dylan, do you have anything?
No, I think I reposted yours, so they would have gone sent to you.
Okay. Okay. Give me a second. I did have a couple.
Sure.
So one I got, and I think this is an easy one. Bang out. I think we'll all get it. Do you think doing an average of 24,000 steps a day is too much?
Well, Trevor's the right person to ask for this because Trevor averages about 25,000 steps a day.
More like 17, 18.
So funny. I'll tell you guys something funny. When I was dieting last year, I had my step count rising steadily throughout a diet, as you should. And once I got to maybe 13 or 14,000 steps, I would say, "Oh wow, this is a fair bit of activity plus 6 weight training sessions a week." And then I had told Trevor this, I think, and he was like, "Man, I average 18,000, 20,000 steps a day. I don't know what you're doing." And I was like, "I will see myself out stage left. That's cool." There's always a bigger fish.
This exactly explains how I would answer this question, though. It's too much if it is an impact on your life. If you do this and think, damn, this is a lot. If you're sitting there carving out time, like, well, I got to go walk for an hour outside so I can get my steps in. I can't relax because I'm, 3,000 steps low. I got to go get those steps in. It's probably too much. If you're getting 24,000 steps though, because you're a waiter in a busy restaurant and you're on your feet running back and forth for 8 hours, one, what are you going to do about it? Quit your job? But two, you just get used to it. It's not really impacting you because it's not something that you're adding per se. It's just a part of your life.
Right. And
I would say it's too much, but you don't have a choice. So
yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's it. You can only really say, is it too much? Is it? It's an additive thing. If it's just a situation you're in where you don't have a choice, what does it matter if it's too much? It's not like that's changing, so it's steady for tracking training at least.
Yeah. I worked as a waiter for a while, so I would do those 18, 20K days. And I didn't like, sometimes those days would wreck me just like systemically, but like I didn't really feel like it actually impacted my like leg training. But you know what though? Actually, I should probably throw in the caveat that my legs don't need that much volume. So I maybe if I was pushing volume on my legs, it would have been a different story. But then again, it goes into worrying about things you have control over, right?
Yeah.
And also the practicality thing. I love that you mentioned that, Trevor. I try to always take into consideration someone's lifestyle and ask them when I'm adjusting activity, because I've experienced that before too, where if it starts to interfere with your daily life, getting steps in, obviously you need to weigh this against like appetite, especially in like a dieting phase, but like, you know, if it starts to really interfere with your life, then you really got to consider the trade-off that's occurring there. And you know, from a long-term perspective, like, hey, you know, if 8K steps is difficult with your lifestyle, then maybe you should look at modifications to your diet, outside of specific circumstances, like maybe you're doing a competition or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have some subtle pushback on what you just said. So,
sure.
if somebody says to me, for example, that if they have a high step count when they're dieting, and they say that it is an inconvenience on their life, I would very much be quick to remind them that a diet is a fleeting period of time. It is a snapshot, and it is not your life. And you signed up for this, and sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do. And just remember that it's temporary. And generally, raising steps is easier than cutting food. So, and most people don't want to cut food, especially as the diet progresses and you eat less and less. So, you know, you say to yourself, oh, okay, well, if this is an inconvenience, we can always cut food, but don't complain now because you're going to complain either way. So, what do you want to do? But either way, you're going to have a trade off. And then down to the other part, you said when someone says, in that specific instance, if you program someone on a mass or on maintenance to do 8 to 10,000 steps and they go, it's inconvenient on your life, you go, well, at the end, what do you want to do? I mean, you want to just sit on your butt? Like, this is a health thing. Literally, it's a health thing. 8 to 10,000
Right.
steps. I could argue that everybody should be doing 8 to 10,000 steps a day in their life. So if someone says,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's too hard," like, I don't really care. Too hard, okay? You know, there's plenty of people that have big issues. It's not my fault that you're lazy. You know, if you're not getting 8,000 steps in a day, you're lazy. It's a fact. Get a hobby. You know,
Yeah.
it's
no,
not a.
I agree with that. Like there's a certain point up to, you know, 8 to 10,000. I mean, shoot, most people 8,000 steps is maybe an hour and a half of actually walking.
Yeah.
Combined of everything in your day. You know,
Yeah,
Right.
that's not
but
much.
this
Now, if
is
we're
the
talking
thing.
18,000 steps,
Sure, 100%,
5,000 steps, that's
100%.
where, yeah,
So
that's where it's like,
for the
eh.
person listening, if anybody hasn't heard this before, 8 to 10,000 steps is what you should shoot for at a minimum for baseline, for health, for maintenance, when you're massing, whatever. When you're dieting, 10 to 15,000 steps a day is probably the meat and potatoes of where you're going to get it done. And anything over 15,000 steps, I get you, is going to be hard, is going to be annoying. That is exotically high. And if you do have to go there, recognize that you should probably only go there for a shorter period of time at the end of a diet, whatever. And unless your lifestyle requires it, anything over 15,000 steps a day is unnecessary.
Yes, unless your lifestyle requires it, it's untenable to do.
In a
And
diet, I should also say, because you're not going to really do that any other way.
yeah, and even at the point of the diet, like that's where you have to start having like a cost benefit of if it's worth it and how important the goal is to you, especially a goal and a set timeline is to you. Maybe you can
Yeah.
push that timeline back and you don't have to do that.
And maybe the what we were saying, Shimmy, maybe the 8,000 is a little too low of an example, but I will say that I do agree with the fact that you should have a conversation with your client about it, before, like, say, prescribing something like that, because again, I do think there are people who are limited to some degree, and I do understand like an hour and a half of walking, that's totally sustainable. 8 to 10K steps should be something that most people can execute on. But I think they also generally meeting the client where they're at is probably something, especially the clients that are maybe not doing bodybuilding or things at a competitive level. There are definitely some like lifestyle factors that I generally just try to consider. Competitive bodybuilder, I'm generally like, hey, just do this thing and you have to get it done, basically.
Yeah, competitive bodybuilder, it's an entirely different scenario, and at that point, it's like, yeah, you signed up for it.
Right. But I do think if you were to say, hey, you have the option of doing more activity or eating less food. Most people would probably choose doing more activity.
Yeah,
Mhm.
eating less food sucks at a point,
Right.
Mhm.
unless you're like
I
fresh
mean,
off a mass.
you could like
Yeah.
you could drop their calories down to 15K and see how they like it, and then they're like, oh yeah, maybe I should do that.
What's the
couple of
lowest
steps up.
calories any of you have ever got on? I know your last contest, you were like what, 1,800?
I think 1,800 is the lowest I got.
So yeah, Dylan, that's not really fair. I think for you to compare to Trevor and I, because you competed and Trevor and I haven't. Like I've been lean before, but I've not been stage lean before. My calories didn't get crazy low.
Oh, I've been
Maybe yeah, I know you have. 2,200, nothing crazy. 2,200 with a step count of like 17 or 18,000. And 6 weight training sessions a week. Yeah, I think that was it. I think that's probably the lowest that I've been.
lowest I've been was 1,350.
Yeah, I've never done that.
This was years ago, and like 50 pounds ago. But I think it was like
Dylan, he
11,000
just gave us the Globo Gym reference. See that guy? That was me. 80 years and 65 pounds ago.
Oh god, it's such a good movie.
Just imagine Trevor zapping himself trying to eat a donut, just holding it in front of his face.
You want that donut? Go ahead and have a bite.
Oh, you know.
They may be making a
good.
second movie, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I saw
They
the
are?
rumor.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, to be, if I'm really honest, I don't want them to because I
I
don't
don't
want
want
them to
to
mess
either.
with greatness. There's no way they'll be able to top it. No chance.
It's gonna be like
But as
in the 90s or like early 2000s when like every movie had a direct to VHS.
exactly. But also as a diehard fan, I would love to see what they're gonna do. But I know they're gonna ruin it.
I'm not saying I
So,
wouldn't watch it. I'm just saying it would suck.
yeah.
Mm.
Exactly. Like
That's
Rush
what I
Hour
mean.
4. At this point, Rush Hour 4, they're waiting for a script. Chris Tucker wants to do it. Jackie Chan wants to do it. They're waiting for a script, but all the Rush Hours are so good. I don't want you to do another one. It's too good as it is.
Yeah.
I guess there's a nostalgia aspect, as long as they don't completely ruin it.
They will. That's the thing.
That's the
They
problem.
can't help it. They have to ruin it.
I was thinking about that. I felt like I don't know how you guys like feel about Batman, but I was thinking about the trilogy that one, like where they didn't actually like just ruin it. As I felt like they sustained it decently
The
well with
Christopher Nolan
Batman.
trilogy.
The Christopher Nolan trilogy. I feel like they
Yeah,
actually
after that, they
sustained.
should have just stopped. They should have
Yeah.
retired it after that. After the one with Bane, obviously, which was fantastic, they should have
Yeah.
left it alone. Ben
Yeah.
Right. I
Affleck,
mean,
At least for a
unnecessary.
long
Robert
time.
Pattinson, unnecessary.
I'm sorry. Okay. Any Batman fan, this is like a big thing. And I'm a huge Batman fan. Just like my wedding ring is a Batman ring.
oh really?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, if I can, I don't know if it'll come up here.
That's so sick.
I
love it.
But Robert Pattinson had no business being Bruce Wayne Batman. But if they would have made Batman Beyond with him as Terry McGinnis, that would have been amazing. That's what they should have done. They messed up.
Dude, I'm
I've
not.
said my
Terry
piece.
McGinnis.
Terry McGinnis is the uh, character who takes over the mantle of Batman like 50 years down the line when Bruce is retired because he's too beat up. He can't be Batman anymore. First of all, it was a cartoon in the 90s. How have we not seen it?
Yeah. No, I'm actually gonna go. My brother has gotten really into Batman recently. I just bought him the Batman Who Laughs for his birthday, the graphic novel, and so I
So
want to
terrifying.
I haven't seen much of the cartoons, but I've really been wanting to. So he has them all. So when I go back home, I'm gonna go watch all those.
Yeah, I've literally watched like the entirety of every single Batman cartoon.
I actually remember you telling me this
movie.
now. Yeah. I love it, man. Did you get any more questions, Trevor?
I had like one more. I think we can grab. Give me a second.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great way to close out this episode. We'll get you out of here soon.
Some of them as the. Yeah, this is one I wanted to do because I think it was pretty good. as anonymous. Do you think it will be okay to have only leg curls for a few mesocycles to open up more potential back volume during a back priority phase?
I'm here for that.
Yeah,
I'm very very here for that.
I think
Also
it ties into the same thing we were talking about. Is if you need more stimulus for your back, doing any kind of like heavy hinge is going to be fatigue that interferes with back training. You can maintain your hamstrings well with leg curls,
Yeah.
and that's going to open up more ability to train more for your back.
But you don't need to maintain them. You can grow them.
I mean, yeah, you can
curls.
grow them
You
potentially.
can definitely grow
Depending
them
on where
with
you're at
just
with your
leg curls.
specialization, if you needed to.
Yeah,
I think you can definitely still grow them with leg curls. And I think if you're doing a lot of stiff-legged deadlifting, I mean, chances are you're not doing any regular deadlifting or deficit or whatever. When you do them right, stiff-legged deadlifting is arguably the hardest movement that your bodybuilder has in his arsenal. So for you to pull that out, I mean, it's a big fatigue dropper or big
oh my God,
recovery
yeah.
opener for the rest of your training, for the rest of your body, you know? So you say, oh, it's a back specialization, but I can tell you, if you're not doing any stiff-legged deadlifting, your quad training is going to go better.
Yeah, if someone told me they wanted to specialize in quads, I would pull out heavy hinging.
Yeah, and I also think even if your technique is really good, this is a hot take, but it's a fact. That's also one that will cause injuries and sprains and niggles and whatever for people, even if your technique is really good. So to pull that movement out
more than once.
I've torn my hamstring doing stuff like it deadlifts, like for real.
Back. Yeah, it's
sure.
just it's a risk that's always there.
So to pull that movement out for a little while, that's nice. You know, it's nice to not have to worry about it, and you don't even sometimes you don't even know what injury or ache or pain is lying around the corner, and one day it just happens. So to pull a movement out from time to time, for even for a few months, especially a movement like that, I think it's fine. I definitely think it's fine.
100%.
Yeah, and when people are talking about like, hey, you need a hinging movement and a knee flexion movement to be able to maintain the muscle, you don't need to have both of those in. Like you can just maintain with just one of those in, right? You don't have to have both.
And it's not like it's not like you completely won't grow. If any, there's going to be some regional hypertrophy, and maybe by only doing one and not the other, you won't maximally grow, but you can still grow.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask. Okay, so this is something I'm kind of dealing with. When do you guys think it might be appropriate to just pull an exercise like stiff-legged deadlifts? And is there a situation where you would just completely pull something?
Well, I mean, I think that the layup of the answer is you completely pull something when there's starting to accrue some sort of joint or connective tissue issue.
Yeah.
That's the layup of the answer. But Dylan, you're smart. You would have already figured that out. You didn't need us to tell you that. So I think that a great time to pull a movement out at face value without doing any troubleshooting is 2 to 4 months. So without having any context, 2 to 4 months is probably a good idea. Another time is when you notice that your performance is starting to decrease after hitting some PRs. So you can't hit.
Like you rinse the fatigue, you start a mesocycle, and you're just not really progressing.
Sure. And why I say after PRs is the following. If you notice that you're not able to hit a PR, well, the movement is going to get stale and you're just going to pull it anyway. But you can't PR forever. I mean, maybe people that are enhanced, so you guys can speak to this, you can PR for longer. But if you're someone who's natural and you're doing a movement, you're not just hitting PRs all the time unless you're a beginner or early stage intermediate. So let's say you're cumulatively you've hit 10 or 20 pound PR on a stiff-legged deadlift and you've been lifting weights for 5 years. And now after your next deload, you're starting to, it doesn't feel so good. You know, at that point, I think you would pull it. So to give you a more succinct answer, once you've hit a couple of PRs and your performance starts to decrease marginally, I would just pull it. Because like I did it. I did the thing. I got the t-shirt. I know what I did here. I don't need to stick around and potentially like get injury or open myself up to something, and I'll come revisit this in 3 or 4 months and do it again.
I think you just hit the nail on the head, Shimmy, where you've taken your progress, you see it slowing down, you see it stalling, and instead of bullheaded trying to push through it, you pull it before something bad does happen. Not saying something bad will happen, but it can. And if the progress is already slowing down anyway, it's probably time for a break because it's probably been 4, 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
Or not, or it hasn't been. Right? Maybe it's been 2 months, but at the same time,
it's been a little bit of training time, regardless. And novelty is a thing, and it is a variation is a good thing, and it's a viable thing as long as it's not abused.
I don't know why I just thought of this weird analogy where like novelty would be like you're at the club and you think this girl that you're talking to is like super attractive, and then so that's masking the like, hey, maybe this isn't like if you were determining if an exercise is appropriate and you're going to keep it in for a mesocycle, novelty could potentially mask that. I feel like because you're like, oh, I got really sore from it, whatever. And I feel like if you were to like, okay, you turn on the lights on the club come on like mesocycle 2 or 3, and you realize, oh shit, that actually wasn't a great movement for me. I don't know if that even has any.
It does.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Like,
That's got some legs. That's got some legs. Seriously, it's good.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking is just because I'm like kind of sad. Like I obviously I know this to some extent, and I think it's helpful for people to hear. But I also like I've been trying to keep stiff-legged deadlifts in, and like do a pre-exhaust and see if I can keep them in. But it's just like they're so fatiguing at this point, and I am kind of incurring certain like little niggles here and there.
Wait a minute. Another answer that was an obvious layup that we didn't tell you, Trevor and I both didn't answer this, is when you notice that you have to do too much volume for it to
That was what I was literally just about to say.
I don't know why we didn't mention that. So with a stiff-legged deadlift, it's a great example. Usually you start it mesocycle 1 if you haven't done it for a while. 1 or 2 sets is what you're sticking with for a week. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, cool. Then 1 to 2 sets becomes 2 to 3. Maybe it becomes 3 to 4. Once you get to a point where you're doing, let's say, 5 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts, most people never get there. But if you do get there, it's too much. Or if you're starting at week 1 and you already have to do, let's say, 3 or 4 sets, week 1, probably not great. Probably your time could be better spent.
Mesocycle with 3 or 4 sets.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's where just pulling it out and bringing something else for novelty is worth it, just because it's going to bring the volume needs down. Because the fatigue from 4 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts, Jesus, you'll get through 1 week before you have performance decrements and something.
Or you just won't want to do it.
Yeah, that too. Honestly, I've been there. It's like I don't want to do this anymore. This is kind of a like psychological fatigue. Not wanting to do it is a big thing.
So real.
I get that
only when you're intermediate or advanced, or when you have a really good gauge of technique and effort and stuff. Because psychological fatigue for the other people don't matter, but for people like us, for example, when I don't want to do something, a lot of times it's usually a really good indicator that I shouldn't do it.
Yeah,
but I don't take most people's. Yeah, I don't take my clients that I work with or anyone that asks me. I usually don't take that to the bank. But let's say if Trevor and I were training together and he's like, dude, I'm just not into doing these stiff-legged deadlifts, I would probably not argue with him. Probably be like, all right, cool, don't do it.
And one other considering factor is I mean you guys mentioned this earlier, but I think like for me, for stiff-legged deadlifts and really strong lifters, the stimulus to time ratio is like it takes so long of my workout.
Huge, bro. That cannot be understated.
People overlook it all the time, and that's the whole thing with like unilateral stuff and whatnot as well. Like sure, they can be great, but God, if you're gonna do an entire workout that's all unilateral, Jesus Christ, that's gonna take you forever.
I don't got time for that, like Shimmy said.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Okay, don't nobody know Stu like I do. No one. Trevor, you never watched The Hangover, so you don't understand.
I've never watched The Hangover. You're right. I never have.
I've seen Hangover. It's been so long.
You've never watched a lot of anime though, so I don't really want to hear.
I don't like anime.
Okay, well, that's your loss.
No, because you also like comedy movies. You just don't. You just haven't
I
watched
like comedy movies, but I don't like all the stupid comedy you do. You have
it.
you like SpongeBob, don't you?
No, I don't never watch Nickelodeon growing up.
Oh my god.
I just gained some respect for you.
Really?
Oh, really?
That's my childhood right there. Watching Rugrats.
Yeah, I didn't know
I
where that.
despise
I thought I didn't know where that was going. I thought Trevor's gonna be like, "Yeah, you really are a Martian. You don't make any sense." But that's good. Yeah, I did. I was a Cartoon Network person.
Cartoon Network was clearly better.
I don't
In
know. I
every
just never
way.
watched it. I never watched Nickelodeon. Um,
After the
Dylan,
90s, when they got
Dylan,
rid of like Rugrats, Nickelodeon was not good.
seen The Hangover or no?
I've seen The Hangover. It's just been a minute.
Have you seen all of them? Second and third one?
Hmm. I saw the first the most time, so that's what I remember.
Yeah, bro,
most
you
of
got to
the
rewatch
first.
them. You got to rewatch them. It's like mandatory. You got to rewatch them.
I
They're
will
so
actually, because
good.
I think I have a different perspective now, and I think I would find them even more funny because I feel like I just
They're the
you know,
best, man. Alan
much.
is life. Alan is eternal. He's a god.
Alan Zach.
Yes.
Zach Galifianakis. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'll check those out.
He's
Hey, have you guys
amazing.
watched?
Walks into Caesar Palace. He's just like, "Is your hotel pager friendly? I'm not getting a cig on my beeper."
I remember that.
Amazing. Amazing.
The what's the documentary about the bodybuilder couple? Have you guys heard about that?
No, but I want to watch that.
Maddie and
No.
I think we might watch it tonight.
What is
what
it?
was the couple's name? I can't remember, but I remember seeing
It's
like,
dude, it's a wild story.
Yeah.
I think it's on Netflix, right?
yeah, yes, I think Nick Strength and Power did a story about it a long time ago, and I had watched.
I
it.
Who are
remember
they? Who are
hearing
the
about it.
people?
God, for the life of me, I can't remember.
They
Who are the
were,
people?
I'll send it to you, Shimmy.
yeah,
But
they were like professional bodybuilders that like competed, but then like got into drugs, and then I think one of them, they were
One
high on
killed
meth,
the
and like
other.
one of them killed the other, and it's just like this
Yeah.
huge scandal. They try to cover it up, like, and went to
It's
jail. It's crazy.
I want to watch it.
Yeah.
I never heard of it.
Yeah, you should check it out.
The documentary I think just came out.
Honestly, sounds too dark for me.
Maybe there's some humor thrown in.
I am the angelic one. Okay,
You are. You're like
I have to
Yes.
watch that stuff.
There.
I have to watch that stuff because my girlfriend is doing forensic pathology, so like all she wants to watch is like murder documentaries all day.
Well,
Forensic
I'm just saying,
pathology.
like, your girlfriend seems super cool, but it's on brand. She also has all these spiders, listens to emo music.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I mean, it's
All
on
fits.
brand.
Our house is decorated with skeletons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Dylan. Basically, what we're saying is, don't bring your girl around Trevor. This is what we're saying.
I mean, I think my wife with her would like run off together.
Yes.
I told
Yes.
Aaron that she has spiders.
And then
She's like, I
Dylan
wanna
would
go.
be alone. Then Dylan would be alone. So ergo,
Well,
Dylan,
Me and
don't
Dylan
bring
would just
her
go
around.
train
Yeah,
together.
exactly. We just go work out. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Go lift the
Right.
body like
Which
Perfect,
you guys
perfect.
do already, I guess.
Yeah. Perfect scenario. I love it. All right, we'll let you guys get out of here. It was a good podcast.
Yeah, it's fun.
Cool. We'll talk about the next time we meet up. But as always, I'll link all their stuff down below. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and share it as well, because we appreciate that.
Yes,
And send us awesome questions, guys. We do this for you. So we need good questions. So therefore we give the good answers.
If you give us enough questions, we can do an entire podcast on Q&A.
Yeah, we could probably do that. We could probably make that happen.
If not, then we'll just ramble, and because you can see we're freakishly good at that. So if it's okay.
Yeah, most definitely. All right. You guys have a good night, okay?
Cool. Talk to you guys later.